idea of context and the blurring of boundaries and understanding the medium that you're working with is sort of the themes I want to carry forward here. And then for me, my artistic practice really probably spent the most time of my life in doing conceptual noise music. And you know, I say that now, and I often feel like I have to give some big disclaimer, but you know, if you do anything for 12 years, you get pretty good at it. So no one could really tell that we were good at it, but we were. After 12 years of making noise, we made noise pretty well. So, but what I enjoy, what I've learned through that process is again these structures that we create that are sometimes very arbitrary. So, you know sort of this so a lot of kind of deconstructionist ideas as I move forward into my career. And then I started working for Asthmatic Kitty Records, and this was about in 2000. And for me, what I decided to do, or pretty early on, and I was fairly conscious of it. I mean, this wasn't this wasn't sort of some daily mantra that I would say, but there was definitely an attitude in which I approached running a record label as if if it was one big art project. And it helped to have artists and musicians who we worked with who had a similar idea. And for those of you who are not familiar with Sufjan Stevens, he is an artist who I think is continually trying to redefine himself while not completely disfranchising his audience, but definitely is you know, doesn't continue to stop experimenting. And so through the label, through running a business, I was very interested in how can running a business be like an art form, and what are the necessary rules, and what are the sort of the arbitrary or unnecessary rules of running a business. And so we would do all kinds of crazy things. Like one time, Pitchfork ran a review, which is a prominent. I'm going to assume everyone knows what Pitchfork is, but for those who don't, it's a prominent indie rock review website. Pitchfork ran a review of one of our records and gave it a really horrible review. And they have this rating system of 1 to 10, and they gave it a 5.4. And so this was shortly after Radiohead had released In Rainbows, and what we decided to do was to implement critic-based pricing. So we sold the record for $5.40, and we said, well, let critics decide what the value of our records are, because essentially that's what we're doing in that relationship as a record label to Pitchfork. They are determining the value of our records and often affect the sales of our records. So we said, let's take this one step further and play with this idea. And so, you know, a lot of this often is gimmick and prank, but again, very interested in sort of examining the roles and the structures that we've set up. So that brings me to Indianapolis, which, by the way, I think we have one of the best designed flags of any city. I'm pretty proud of our flag. But I moved here about 7 years ago, and it wasn't until about until about 5 years ago that I got really interested in getting more involved in the city. I think I wasn't sure that this was going to be our home, and when I decided it was our home is when I started to plug in and get involved with city and urban development from a cultural standpoint. And Indianapolis, what I started approaching Indianapolis was the same way that I approached the record label and the music that I made and other things I did. That what if I approached Indianapolis as a giant art installation, or as a blank canvas, or, well, definitely not blank, but as a situation or a context in which what I do is site responsive and site specific and site reflective, and that looking at the city and these opportunities to embed culture, use culture as a way of advancing the city. And I don't mean so much from a public art strategy or building some art center or having that be our branding, but really using culture as a strategy. And also I just, and for the reason being, not from some sort of Richard Florida kind of approach. And I'm not a very while I appreciate some of his thinking, this is not an attraction and retention strategy for young talent. That may be an outcome, and that would be a welcome outcome, but really for me, it stems from that I fundamentally believe that art and culture both enriches life, but it also opens up opportunities for understanding the other, for building community, and for being a component to revitalizing communities and neighborhoods. And so kind of moved then into this idea of something that you're going to start hearing, I think, a lot in sort of the city dialogue, that there's going to be more and more a pushback or a backlash to this idea of livability. And what I would like to advocate for is that, and I think others are doing this as well, is that we don't abandon the principles or concepts of livability, but we bring in a social justice aspect and ask the question, livable for who? And begin to sort of strive for equitable livability. And so this has become even more of a priority for me and more of an area of my focus as I now work for Health and Hospital Corporation, which is essentially the parent administration municipal corporation for Marion County, which, by the way, is the same as Indianapolis. We're a UniGov city. So we oversee the health department for the county and also our public hospital. And so our public hospital, which is currently called Wishard, which will soon be called Eskenazi Hospital due to a really significant charitable gift, we are building a brand new hospital, and our population, 40% of our patients are uninsured, and we only receive only about 12% of our patients have commercial insurance. So this is the most vulnerable population in our city. And we are building a brand new hospital. It'll be one of 10 LEED Silver certified hospitals in the United States. It will have, all these, it's a very nice facility. And, and the thought is this can become a model for that when you go to build a public hospital, it can be something more. And we have the advantage, too, of our model is not a pay-for-service. So, we're a little bit of ahead of the curve with healthcare reform. Obviously, it will greatly impact us, but we've never have made money off of pay-for-service. We make money by keeping people out of our emergency room. So primary care becomes very important. So when we built the new hospital, we wanted to make sure that the values of wellness and health are embedded in that program and in that structure in that hospital. And so, one of the things I do with the new hospital is I manage the public art program, and these are just two renderings of two of the pieces that will be in the building. And I'm not going to go into detail on that, but I will say that, again, for me, my background, I'm very interested in creating environments through the use of art as opposed to an object for adoration. However, that little gray man at the bottom is adoring this piece of art. But this idea that people want to experience, I think it lowers people's guard when they come into an experience of art as opposed to an object of affection. And so, and while we will have some objects to raise people's affection, I suppose, the idea is to create this context, this environment that is both inspirational, reflective, and also one that creates a more what's the word for them to come into. So real quick, I just want to touch on a couple things as it relates to city things that maybe we can kind of spark a conversation around this. And these are just some things that I've been thinking about theme-wise as I think about city building. We are a mid-sized city, and I don't know what Orlando's population is, but I would guess that you guys are kind of in a similar context. And I'm sure that you struggle in the same way we do thinking about brand. And I have to tell you, I hope that you all would just abandon the idea of brand, because brand is what, I forget who said this, but brand is what other people say about you when you're not in the room. You can't control your branding. And if you look at any city in the United States, I bet bet very few of you can tell me what a brand of a city is. I mean, you could maybe say a logo, kind of like the New York logo, or a slogan, but really, like, what is the brand or the narrative of a city? And you know, often the narrative is created by other people's experience of you, and so, you know, a lot of people kind of want to mitigate their brand liability, I suppose, by getting out in front of that. But the reality is, mid-sized cities are either going to grow or they're going to shrink. And I think if we act like subdivisions, where we try to create these brands for our downtowns that are like Wispy Willows or Running Creek or whatever lame sort of gated community name we have for our downtowns, we are positioning ourselves as a suburban city. That we are hamstringing ourselves against really growing or allowing the city to evolve in its own, create kind of its organic narrative that really is not something I think that you want to control, because you limit by creating that brand. So that's just a thought that I've been thinking through. It's not a completely baked thought, but just something for you all to help me think through. And then the other thing I'm really interested in is you know, our current mayor, when he first came in, was very criticized. He actually is kind of an accidental mayor. He ran on a property tax issue that people were really upset with our former mayor, and got in there and I think was very surprised to become mayor. And he's turned out to be a great mayor, in my opinion. But even still, he's very criticized because of a lack of vision. And what his vision has been to fill potholes. And it's amazing to me that what and it's clearly he's doing more than that, but he's really focused on infrastructure. And infrastructure is this thing that's not very sexy. It's not a music district. It's not a mural program. It's not attracting a sports team, which we happen to do a very good job of, but it is something that it's, you know, the invisible structural bone and muscles of your city. And what I've been really interested in this idea is, like, what are other forms of infrastructure, both built and implied, that you can be working on as a city? And so kind of going back to the idea of talent attraction and retention, we often try to create these sort of programs or whatever to address those needs. But I think if we start thinking about how do we create talent infrastructure, so how do we create a system or like a trellis or a lattice that allows for these things to sort of grow up around it? And so you know, the way I think about it is that cities really thrive when the immigrants of all varieties come in and have the opportunity for ownership. One of the reasons that Detroit really suffered is that the African American community that came into that city when they did were pushed away from having any sort of ownership, and that lack of ownership, you know, that to me, that's sort of the fundamental issue with projects and with government housing, is that there's no ownership. And there's examples of where people have and there's an example actually in Baltimore where people went in and bought up the projects and then remortgaged at the same cost that these people were paying, you know, some, you know, very minimal rent, mortgaged the homes back to these people who were already living there, and it transformed the neighborhood, because all of a sudden you have ownership, you have an interest in keeping that, you know, taking care of that. And because, you know, up until that, people thought, I'm going to leave here. This is transition. This is not long term. This is not permanent. You know, but as soon as they own it, there's an opportunity there. So somewhere in there, again, I don't know what that translates into, but, you know, and I'm not against doing creative things. I'm not against doing projects like mural projects or music centers or whatever. But I think we tend to ignore the very unsexy, but also pretty, you know, foundational, no pun intended, opportunity of focusing on infrastructure. And then the last thought I'll just leave you with, and give you some time for questions, is something that we've been, myself and some others here, have been thinking a lot about as we think about cities. And just real quick, can you all hear me okay? I'm just going for it. So, is everything okay? Okay, good. Okay, so this concept. This is a concept that we came up with, and I'm guessing there's probably other things out there similar to this. So, but it's something that I would highly recommend as an exercise sometime as you think about Orlando. Run some things through this. And so let me give you kind of an example of what this is about. So our mayor is a huge cycling advocate, and he loves the bike. He's been really good to the bicycle community in Indianapolis. He's put in a ton of bike lanes, which, by the way, just even striping a bike lane, which almost costs nothing for the city, sets something in motion that it's amazing to watch what that's set in motion here in Indianapolis. It's led to other initiatives. Like, at first people say, oh, big deal, or this is such a dangerous bike lane, like, can't you do it right? Can't you do a protected lane? And yeah, I think that stuff should come eventually, but just striping for bike lanes and that, getting that started has been really interesting to watch what that's done here. But when they first started doing bike lanes, there was people complaining or saying stuff like, oh, we're not a bicycle city. That's Portland, or that's wherever. Like, we don't, that's some other city's strategy. And my response was, no, that's a baseline for any 21st century city. You have to have bicycles now. And whether people use it or not is not the point. It's if you're going to be taken seriously as a city, bike lanes now are part of the baseline for being a city. So, and there's other examples of baseline. I would argue that a music scene of some sort, it doesn't have to be the live music capital like Austin, or the singer-songwriter haven of Austin or of Nashville, or the hipster cesspool of Brooklyn. You have to have a music scene of some sort, and so that's a baseline for a city. I don't think having a symphony is baseline. I think that's an antiquated baseline. But having some sort of music scene is definitely part of being a city. Having immigrant culture is a baseline, and not just having it, but celebrating it and having it be part of the fabric of your city. So then you have to say, okay, well then, you can't compete by just having the baselines. You then need to have things that are distinctive, and you also need to have some exceptionals. One of our distinctives here in Indianapolis has been what was called the sports strategy, of the amateur sports strategy. And that has worked pretty well. I think that is what essentially led to us having the Super Bowl. And but distinctive is a little bit harder to figure out sometimes. And I think the distinctives that work best are often things that are already part of your DNA as a city. And sometimes they can even be things that you're maybe slightly embarrassed about, but they're things that you can leverage to be something that's attractive or sets you apart. So, for instance, you can have a baseline, and then there can be a distinctive aspect of that baseline. So, I'm trying to remember where this was. It might have been in London. There was, the High Line was a distinctive in New York at some point, but now there's other cities doing things like the High Line, and that's slowly kind of becoming a new baseline. These sort of repurposed pedestrian greenways that are non-traditional. So that's maybe not the best example, but I think you get the idea. And then the exceptional is something that's done really well. It doesn't necessarily have to be a distinctive. Like, a baseline can be exceptional. Like, we could have the best, the most, really well-protected bike lanes. Like, that could be our exceptional. And exceptional can often become, can also often be simultaneously a distinctive, but it doesn't have to be. So it's not hierarchical. What I try to illustrate here is that, a baseline can, a distinctive is not, this is not a good chart. So this is just a quick PowerPoint chart, but, distinctives don't necessarily need to be contributing or being part of a baseline, but they are part of what's important about a city. So it takes a little bit more to flesh that out, but and we are trying to think through that a little bit more, but you kind of get the idea. So finally, we started this thing called We Are City here in Indianapolis, and the idea, we do a yearly summit, and then we have a twice weekly email that goes out about city issues both here and elsewhere. And if you want to get a taste for the issues in Indianapolis, it's definitely Indianapolis focused for the first half of the email, but you can sign up at wearecity.us. But the reason we started this is because we have an identity crisis. This kind of goes back to what I was saying about a suburban mindset for urban development. We've had this mindset that I feel like there's a lot of residents who are not even sure if living in the city is a positive thing. And so we're advocating that it's a very positive thing. And yes, there's lots of challenges. The citizens are what really make up that city. So that's where I'm at with stuff. That's sort of where my thoughts are right now, and I hope that gives you some good thoughts there. And see if I can. There we go. Any thoughts or questions on that? That was a lot of information. Thanks for hanging through on that.
This mic up to you as well, and hopefully that will.
Okay, can you hear me?
He's hearing you from here, and that's hearing you from there, so sorry.
Okay. Okay.
Yep.
What specific type of issues do you guys discuss with your group in Indianapolis, and what other projects have you done specifically in the city, and what have you basically accomplished with that group so far? Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, thank you. Issues, you mean specifically with the
Yeah,
We Are City project? Issues, you mean specifically with the We Are City project, or just in general issues that we're facing?
Specifically with the We Are City project, since you said you have citizens meet every so often to discuss city issues. Can you give an example of an issue that you've worked on or talked about?
Yeah, so we, one of the things that we try to be very conscious of is that we don't want to we don't want to be bombed, is that we don't want to be, so there was a discussion, parking garage like that design and so there was a discussion downtown that was just ridiculously ugly. And it was a big issue in the architecture community, and it really sparked this whole big conversation around design in the city. And I don't know if you guys are familiar. If you're not, I highly recommend for all the urban geeks in the audience, Urbanophile. It's a guy named Aaron Wren, writes a blog, and he used to live in Indianapolis, and now he's this guy who kind of has become a spokesperson for all things urban. But he wrote this big long post about why he doesn't live in Indianapolis anymore. It's because of these bad design decisions. And what we decided to do in that particular case was like, look, we're not going to take a side on this, but we're going to make sure that the dialogue continues. And so, but we don't want to leave it just a dialogue. But we feel that our strength right now is getting everyone in on a healthy and proactive conversation about the opportunities of city living and urbanism. And what's been great is, we've got a subscriber list of about 600 people, which doesn't sound like a lot, but when you look at who's on that list, they are key stakeholders, and they are city officials, there are corporate officials, there's some big names on there, and we have a 50% open rate, which is kind of unheard of for email lists. So for me, like, that was sort of an accidental. We feel like we're actually getting the narrative consistent. Well, and I said, you don't want to have a common narrative, but at least we're getting people talking and thinking about these issues. Now, as far as a project that we specifically have done, we're actually just launching this thing called Import, where we're bringing people in from other towns to do projects. And from New Orleans, from the Civic Center. I don't know if you all are familiar with Candy Chang, but she's a kind of a neighborhood design person. Her partner James Reeves, and then one of their other partners, Oliver Blank, who's a composer, they are coming to Indianapolis to do some actual physical projects in the city. And one of them is one that I've been working on for a real long time, which is site-specific composition. We're getting composers and musicians and local musicians to write pieces of music for specific spots in the city. And essentially, this is sort of an ephemeral, not super, maybe, impactful immediately, but I really think what we're trying to do is create, through that project, contribute and build upon a cultural legacy, and those become assets that you have down the road, if that makes sense. So that was a long-winded answer to your question, basically saying we haven't done much. I as far as tangible on-the-ground projects, mostly my tangible on-the-ground projects is trying to build a brand new hospital, but this We Are Cities dialogue, I think, has been an important part of our conversation about urbanism and the values of city living in Indianapolis.
Deal with technology.
Okay.
And speak up for the audience as well.
Yeah. So you were talking about branding and about the idea of sort of abandon the concept of branding. We right now have a number of very fledgling neighborhoods that all have adopted this sort of quirky name, that like the 5 Points idea. We've got the Milk District and we've got Audubon Garden District and so on. And it's working all right, but do you think that there's should they be focusing on thinking more unified, or what's the idea behind losing the branding there?
Well, yeah, and let me put, I think neighborhoods are different. Well, yeah, and let me put, I think neighborhoods are different. I think what I'm getting at is city branding. I think neighborhood strategy of branding can be very effective, but I do think that sometimes we spend more time on thinking about the brand than building the assets. If a community meeting, and I'm sure you've been in these meetings where we're for 2 hours, you're talking about, like, what is our brand? What should the logo be like? What's the colors of the logo? I think that's important stuff, I suppose, but I think even more importantly is, like, maybe that 2 hours should be spent of, like, how do we fix that sidewalk? How do we slow traffic down on this street? It's a balance. Like, I get it. Like, I don't, there's sort of a, you got to obviously bring people around a concept or a vision. One of the things I got to see a neighborhood here do, which I thought was incredibly impactful, was they went through a LEED ND process, which is the LEED Neighborhood Development Certification, and to watch them do an inventory of their assets and see what they can build upon. So instead of it being more about trying to come up with a catchy brand, it was more built around what are the things that we have here? What are the strengths, the current strengths? And this is a classic neighborhood redevelopment strategy of strengths instead of weaknesses. Strengths. So I by all means, I think neighborhoods should be thinking about that. I think they should think about what's unique to them, but that's sometimes where I think the branding can break down. Is where it's often I feel like the brand is showing how they're similar to how they're in other places. So work well, and I've seen it also just, it's a gateway signpost, and I don't know how effective
Great.
that can
And
be.
so
That alone.
maybe 2 more questions or comments. It's a conversation, so it doesn't have to be a question. Just brief comments, please. Pat has a question. Or criticisms. We appreciate that, Michael.
Or
hey,
criticism.
Michael. I don't know if you can see me. Patrick Green. Sorry. Could you tell me more about the We Are Cities Summit? Because I was kind of following it, your emails and kind of checking it out. But give me a little, because I'm interested. I would love to do something like that here, or I don't know if there's any sort of way to. And I sort of mentioned that too. But
yeah. So the We Are Cities Summit. Yeah, so the We Are City Summit, that's been really rewarding. I think for us, what we've focused on has been how do we create an experience that is democratic in the discussion around cities. And so, we have urban planners and architects and, come and speak to the audience. But then we also have, people who are on the ground doing neighborhood stuff in some pretty tough neighborhoods. We have people who are, for instance, the last summit, we had this guy, Nigel Jacobs, who I highly recommend. Just looking at what he's doing, he's part of the, it's called the, blanking. It's in Boston. I'll have to, oh man, I can't believe I'm forgetting. But anyways, what he's doing, he designed like an app for your phone that if you hit a pothole, it registers it. They've done these markings of fire hydrants, so when it snows, clearing those out, sort of crowdsourcing, city data hacking type of things. And then this year we're bringing in, someone that you've brought in before, Don Walewski, who does Conflict Kitchen. We're bringing in there's a guy. Those people. This is like the Max Headroom moment of the night. Okay. Yeah. Hey.
Keep at it, Orlando.
Thanks.
Keep at it, Orlando.
I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you.
And the sound.
Oh. 5 minutes break?
I don't know, not necessarily.
Just a bathroom break.
Okay.
So.
Then announce it.
You guys want to take about a 5-minute break to get a drink or use the restroom? The restrooms are over here. And Zach and Logan.